When I received the letter from the estate office, I assumed it was a scam. A sudden inheritance from an uncle I had never heard of? A remote property on the coast, complete with a lighthouse? It sounded ridiculous, like the setup for a bad movie. But then the documents arrived, official, notarized, and very real. Apparently, my uncle, Edward Bellamy, had passed away, leaving me his property, including Bellamy's Point Lighthouse. There was even a check for travel expenses, enough to cover a plane ticket, car rental, and a few nights at a nearby inn. I should have ignored it. I should have thrown the whole package in the trash and forgotten about it. Instead, I booked the flight. The drive to the lighthouse was long and desolate, the winding coastal road flanked by jagged cliffs on one side and dark, endless ocean on the other. The sky was overcast, and the wind howled relentlessly, rattling the windows of the rental car. When I finally arrived, the place looked worse than I'd imagined. The lighthouse towered over the rocky shoreline, its paint peeling and its windows clouded with grime. The small keeper's cottage nearby was equally decrepit, its roof sagging and its shutters hanging crookedly. As I stepped out of the car, the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks was deafening. The air was damp and salty, and the wind carried a faint, metallic tang that I couldn't place. I approached the cottage first, fumbling with the rusted key the estate office had sent me. The door creaked loudly as it swung open, revealing a dim, musty interior. The furniture was old and covered in dust, and the faint smell of mildew hung in the air. A single envelope sat on the kitchen table, the name Edward scrawled across it in faded ink. I lingered before picking it up, my fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in my uncle's cramped handwriting. To whomever receives this, Bellamy's Point is not a gift. It is a burden. The lighthouse is not what it seems, and it must be maintained at all costs. Do not let the light go out. Whatever happens, keep the beacon lit. It is the only thing keeping them at bay. There was no signature, no explanation, just those cryptic words. I set the letter down, my chest tightening. The wind outside had grown stronger, howling like a living thing. I turned toward the window, and that was when I saw it. A shadow, moving across the rocks near the base of the lighthouse. The shadow moved unnaturally, its outline jagged and shifting, like smoke caught in the wind. My breath hitched as I stared through the grimy window, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There was no one else here. The cliffs were isolated, the nearest town miles away. Yet something or someone was there. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen counter, its batteries weak but functional, and stepped outside. The wind hit me immediately, sharp and cold, tearing at my jacket as I made my way toward the lighthouse. The structure loomed above me, its peeling paint and rusted metal railings giving it a menacing air. The light at the top was faint, its steady beams sweeping across the ocean like a tired eye. The shadow was gone, set at the base of the lighthouse, shining the flashlight around the rocks. Nothing, just the relentless crash of waves and the ceaseless howl of the wind. "Hello," I called, my voice barely carrying over the noise. No answer. I climbed the stairs leading to the lighthouse door, the metal groaning under my weight. The key the estate office had sent me fit into the rusted lock, and with a sharp twist, the door creaked open. The air inside was stale and cold, carrying a faint smell of oil and something else, something sweet and cloying like rotting flowers. The flashlight's beams swept across the room, revealing a narrow staircase spiraling up into the tower. The walls were lined with dusty shelves, stacked with old logs, maps, and tools. At the base of the stairs was a small generator, its wires snaking upward toward the light. It sputtered weakly, the sound irregular and uneven. The letter's warning echoed in my mind. "Do not let the light go out." I climbed the stairs, my footsteps echoing in the confined space. The higher I went, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath clouding in front of me. When I reached the top, the lantern room was dimly lit, its massive lens rotating slowly. The light wasn't steady. It flickered occasionally, as though struggling to stay alive. I approached the mechanism, my flashlight revealing a series of levers and gauges. Most of them were rusted, their markings faded. But one thing was clear: the generator was failing. Before I could investigate further, I felt a faint vibration beneath my feet, like something shifting far below. The light flickered again, and this time it almost went out. Panic surged through me as I remembered the letter. Whatever my uncle had meant, one thing was clear: keeping the beacon lit wasn't just a suggestion. I turned toward the stairs, intending to check the generator, but froze. The shadow was there at the bottom of the staircase. It was larger now, its edges sharper, and it moved with a deliberate, menacing grace. It didn't climb the stairs. It didn't need to. The darkness around it stretched upward, coiling like smoke, reaching toward me. The light flickered again, and the shadow surged forward. The shadow surged up the staircase, its formless lip hair climbing faster than I could react. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the machinery in the lantern room as the light above flickered weakly. "Stay back!" I shouted, my voice trembling as I swung the flashlight toward it. The beam hit the shadow, and for a moment, it recoiled. The lip hair quivered, retreating slightly, but the darkness didn't dissipate. Instead, it twisted and coiled, shifting away from the light before surging forward again. The light from the beacon flickered, and this time it didn't recover. The room plunged into near total darkness, the only illumination coming from my failing flashlight. The air grew colder, and the smell of rotting flowers intensified, wrapping around me like a suffocating shroud. I fumbled for the controls on the lantern mechanism, desperate to get the light back on. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely grip the levers. The shadow loomed closer, its lip hair reaching for me, each movement deliberate and menacing. Then a faint click. The beacon sputtered back to life, its pale light sweeping across the room. The shadow recoiled violently, its edges fraying as the beam cut through it. I watched as it retreated down the staircase, melting into the darkness below. I slumped against the wall, my heart pounding. My uncle's letter wasn't just the ramblings of a paranoid man. Something was here, and it was bound to the light. The flickering beacon wasn't going to hold it back for long. I descended the spiral staircase cautiously, my flashlight flickering with every step. The vibration I'd felt earlier had grown stronger, a deep, rhythmic hum that seemed to come from the foundation of the lighthouse itself. At the base of the stairs, the generator sputtered and hissed, its ancient parts struggling to keep up. Oil leaked from one of the pipes, pooling on the floor, and the wires connected to the lantern mechanism were frayed and blackened. The generator sputtered again, and the light above flickered. The figure tilted its head, and the shadows around it began to spread, crawling toward me like living things. Panic surged through me as the air grew colder. I lunged for the generator, twisting every lever and flipping every switch I could find. The beacon sputtered and roared back to life, its pale light flooding the staircase and the room. The figure let out a shrill, inhuman sound as the shadows around it dissolved, retreating into the cracks and corners of the walls. But the hum beneath my feet didn't stop. It was growing louder, closer, and whatever was making it was still down there. The hum beneath my feet had grown into a steady vibration, resonating through the walls and floor like a heartbeat. Whatever was causing it wasn't just below me, it was moving. I backed away from the generator, the pale light from the beacon above casting long, jagged shadows on the walls. My flashlight's beam darted across the room, but the darkness in the corners seemed to grow thicker, almost defiant. Then the voice returned. "Why did you come here?" It was louder this time, more insistent. The air grew colder, and I felt a sharp, metallic taste on my tongue, like blood or rust. "I didn't want to," I said aloud, though I wasn't sure who I was answering. I didn't even know this place existed. The shadows rippled, shifting like black water. The voice came again, its tone sharp and mocking. "You will leave, but not as you came." Before I could respond, the hum beneath my feet surged, and a deep, resonant crack echoed through the lighthouse. The floorboards trembled, and a thin, jagged fissure split across the center of the room. revealing a sliver of black void beneath. I stumbled back, barely catching myself against the wall. The fissure widened, the wood groaning as chunks of the floor fell away, swallowed by the darkness below. The whispering began again, faint and chaotic, dozens of overlapping voices that seemed to rise from the void itself. The light must not go out. I stared at the fissure, the whispers crawling into my ears and wrapping around my thoughts. They weren't just sounds. They were images, memories that weren't mine. A figure, standing alone in the lantern room, its shadow stretching impossibly far. A storm raging against the cliffs, the sea writhing like a living thing, and the light flickering, failing. The generator sputtered again, snapping me back to the present. The beacon's light dimmed briefly, and the shadows surged, clawing their way toward me. I had to keep the light on. Gritting my teeth, I inched toward the generator, careful to avoid the widening fissure. The machine groaned, its parts grinding together like they were moments from seizing up completely. I yanked the oil can from a nearby shelf, pouring its contents over the rusted gears and levers. The machine roared to life, the beacon above flaring brighter. The shadows recoiled, slithering back into the cracks and corners, and the whispers fell silent. For a moment, I thought I'd won. Then the floor gave way. The boards beneath me shattered, and I plummeted into the darkness below. The fall felt endless. The air was cold and damp, rushing past me in a suffocating embrace. My flashlight slipped from my hand, spinning wildly into the darkness, its flickering beam the only light as I plummeted deeper and deeper. Then, with a bone-jarring thud, I hit the ground. Pain exploded through my body as I rolled onto my back, gasping for breath. My hands clawed at the cold, damp earth beneath me, and the sour, metallic tang of the air burned in my throat. The flashlight lay a few feet away, its beam weak and sputtering. I crawled toward it, my fingers trembling as I grabbed it and swung the beam around. The space I had landed in was vast, far larger than the base of the lighthouse should have allowed. The walls were jagged and damp, covered in strange, looping symbols that pulsed faintly with a sickly green light. The air was filled with a low, rhythmic hum, vibrating through the ground and into my chest. And then I saw them, the shadows. They moved along the walls, twisting and writhing like living things. Their forms were indistinct, constantly shifting, hands becoming claws, faces melting into nothing. They didn't stay in the walls. One by one, the shadows began to detach, pooling onto the floor and stretching upward into tall, jagged forms. They didn't walk. They glided, their movements smooth and predatory. The whispers returned, louder and more frenzied than before. "Why did you let the light falter?" "I didn't," I shouted, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. The shadows stopped, their heads tilting in unison. The whispers shifted, turning accusatory, their voices overlapping like a chaotic symphony. "You came unprepared. You brought the dark with you." I stumbled to my feet, the flashlight's beam darting wildly as the shadows closed in. My chest heaved as I swung the light toward them, hoping to push them back as I had before. But this time it didn't work. The shadows flickered briefly under the light, but they didn't recoil. They moved forward, their forms stretching taller, more solid. Their eyes gleamed faintly, pale and predatory, locking onto me as they began to circle. "You brought the dark with you," the whispers repeated, more insistent now. "You cannot leave. You must stay." "No!" I shouted, backing away. My foot caught on a jagged stone, and I fell hard, the flashlight spinning out of my grasp. The beam landed on the wall behind me, illuminating one of the pulsing symbols. The shadows hesitated. The light from the symbol flared brighter, the sickly green turning to a blinding white. The shadows shrieked, their forms unraveling as they retreated into the cracks of the walls. The hum beneath me grew louder, almost deafening, as the symbol's light intensified. The whispers screamed in protest, their voices blending into a single, agonized wail. Then the ground beneath me began to crack. A fissure split the earth, releasing a blinding light that swallowed everything around me. The light was overwhelming, searing through the fissure like a living thing. It wasn't warm or comforting. It was cold, sharp, and invasive, sinking into my skin and making every nerve in my body scream. I tried to shield my eyes, but the light was everywhere, consuming the cavern and the shadows with it. The whispers grew frantic, their chaotic voices blending into a single, deafening roar. Then everything stopped. The light vanished, leaving me in total darkness. The whispers were gone, the hum silenced, and for a moment, the world felt impossibly still. I forced myself to breathe, my chest heaving as I groped for the flashlight. When I finally found it, the beam sputtered weakly to life, illuminating a narrow tunnel ahead. The cavern I had fallen into was gone. The air here was colder, heavier, and carried a faint, metallic tang that burned in my throat. The walls of the tunnel were smooth and slick, etched with the same looping symbols I had seen in the cavern. They pulsed faintly, casting an eerie, greenish glow that barely lit the path ahead. Something about this place felt wrong. The tunnel wasn't part of the lighthouse. It couldn't be. It stretched endlessly in both directions, twisting and narrowing like a living thing. "Keep moving." The whisper returned, soft and commanding, but this time it wasn't chaotic. It was clear, direct, and unmistakably coming from ahead. I hung back, my instincts screaming at me to turn back. But when I glanced over my shoulder, the way behind me had closed, the smooth walls seamless and unbroken. There was no going back. I tightened my grip on the flashlight and started forward, each step echoing faintly in the oppressive silence. The tunnel seemed to narrow as I walked, the walls pressing closer, their symbols glowing brighter. The whisper came again. "You let it falter. You must restore the light. What are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "What do you want from me?" The whisper didn't answer. The tunnel opened suddenly into a vast chamber, its walls stretching high and far beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. At the center of the room stood an enormous, mechanical structure, a wheel, ancient and rusted, its spokes carved with the same glowing symbols that pulsed along the walls. The hum returned, faint but growing steadily louder as I approached the wheel. The air vibrated with it, and the light from the symbols intensified, casting sharp, jagged shadows across the chamber. The whisper came again, louder now. "Turn it. Restore the balance." I stepped closer, the hum rising to a deafening pitch. My hands trembled as I reached for the wheel, its surface icy and slick. The moment my fingers touched it, the chamber shook violently, and the symbols along the walls flared brighter, their green light turning to blinding white. And then the shadows returned. They poured into the chamber from every crack and crevice, their forms shifting and writhing as they surged toward me. The wheel began to move, its ancient gears grinding against each other, and the light grew brighter, pushing back the advancing darkness. But the shadows didn't stop. They twisted and coiled, their edges razor-sharp, reaching for the wheel as if to stop its motion. "Keep turning," the whisper commanded, its voice urgent and unrelenting. I threw all my weight into the wheel, forcing it to move another inch. The light flared, and the shadows shrieked, their forms unraveling as they recoiled. The chamber trembled, the hum turning into a deafening roar, and the shadows surged forward one last time. The wheel locked into place with a final, thunderous click. The light exploded outward, consuming everything. When the light consumed the chamber, it wasn't the cold, searing glare I had felt before. This light was warm, radiant, and pulsing with life. It flooded every corner of the space, pushing the shadows back into the cracks and crevices where they had come from. The wheel glowed brilliantly, its ancient symbols burning like fire. And for the first time, the hum beneath my feet was steady, strong, rhythmic, and reassuring. I collapsed to the ground, my chest heaving as the air grew lighter, cleaner. The sour metallic tang that had clung to my senses was gone, replaced by the faint, familiar scent of salt water and wind. I looked around. The vast chamber was no longer dark and foreboding. The walls shimmered faintly with residual light, the symbols pulsing gently as though they were breathing. The whispers returned, softer now, their voices weaving into a single, mournful tone. The light was always meant to burn. You must keep it alive. What does that mean? I asked aloud, my voice hoarse. Why me? What am I supposed to do? The whispers didn't answer. Instead, the light from the wheel began to coalesce, gathering into a single, brilliant orb at its center. The orb pulsed once, twice, and then shot upward, vanishing into the ceiling of the chamber. I blinked against the afterimage, my heart pounding. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive, as though the earth itself was holding its breath. Then the floor beneath me shifted. A deep, resonant crack echoed through the chamber, and I scrambled to my feet, gripping the flashlight tightly. The ground began to tremble, the vibrations growing stronger with each passing second. The symbols on the walls dimmed, their light flickering weakly, and the familiar hum faltered. No, I whispered, panic rising in my chest. No, no, no. The cracks in the floor spread rapidly, jagged lines snaking outward from the base of the wheel. From the darkness beneath, a faint, cold wind rose, carrying with it the sour stench of rot and decay. And then I heard it, a voice, deep and resonant, rising from the fissures. It wasn't like the whispers. It was a singular, commanding presence, and it filled the chamber with a terrifying weight. The light cannot save you. The ground beneath the wheel collapsed completely, and from the void below, something began to rise. It was vast, its form shifting and incomplete, made of shadows so dark they seemed to devour the light around them. Its eyes, if they were eyes, were pale and empty, and its gaping maw twisted into a jagged, hungry grin. The hum stopped entirely. The wheel shattered, its glowing fragments raining down like embers. The light was gone, and the darkness surged forward. The darkness poured into the chamber like a living flood, twisting and surging with terrifying speed. The massive shadowy form in the void began to climb upward, its jagged limbs clawing at the edges of the broken floor. Its maw opened, letting out a guttural, bone-deep roar that echoed through the chamber and rattled my skull. I turned and ran. The tunnel I had entered through was gone, swallowed by the collapse. In its place was another path, narrow and uneven, leading upward into a dim, flickering light. My flashlight sputtered and died, leaving me to rely on the faint glow ahead as I scrambled over broken rocks and crumbling earth. Behind me, the creature gave chase. Its limbs stretched impossibly far, the tips of its claws raking across the floor and walls. The air grew colder with each step, the faint, sour stench of rot clinging to my lungs as I fought to keep moving. The whispers returned, frantic and chaotic. Do not stop. The light must burn again. What light? I screamed, my voice hoarse. Tell me what to do. The whispers didn't answer. Instead, they surged forward, weaving around me in a desperate frenzy, urging me toward the light at the end of the path. The ground shook violently, and I stumbled, falling hard against the jagged stones. Pain lanced through my arm as I scrambled to my feet, the creature's shadow looming closer. The narrow path opened into another chamber, smaller and less elaborate than the last. At its center stood a pedestal, carved from the same stone as the walls and etched with glowing symbols. On it rested a single, ancient lantern. The glass of the lantern was cracked, its metal frame rusted and worn, but the faintest flicker of light burned within, barely visible. The whispers screamed now, their voices unrelenting. Ignite the flame. Restore the beacon. I hesitated, my eyes darting between the lantern and the approaching shadow. The creature's limbs scraped against the walls, its massive form folding into the chamber as it pulled itself closer. Do not hesitate, the whispers urged. This is your purpose. Restore the light. I lunged toward the pedestal, my hands trembling as I reached for the lantern. The moment my fingers touched it, a shockwave of cold coursed through me, and the flickering light inside flared briefly before fading again. The creature snarled, its gaping maw stretching wider as it reached for me. Desperation clawed at my chest. I turned the lantern over, searching for a way to fuel it, to spark it back to life. There was a small compartment at its base, empty save for a faint, glowing residue that burned against my skin when I touched it. The whispers rose to a deafening crescendo. The light demands a sacrifice. What sacrifice? I shouted, panic flooding my voice. The creature lunged, its claws inches away, and I did the only thing I could think of. I gripped the lantern tightly and pressed it against my chest. Pain erupted through me, cold and searing at once, as the lantern's light consumed me. My vision blurred, and I felt my strength draining away, pulled into the lantern like water through a sieve. The light inside flared, blinding and brilliant, filling the chamber with a radiant glow. The creature screamed, its form unraveling as the light tore through it. Its limbs disintegrated, its jagged maw collapsing into itself as it was dragged back into the void below. The chamber trembled violently, the walls cracking and crumbling as the light surged outward. And then everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, the chamber was gone. I was back in the lighthouse, standing in the lantern room at the very top of the tower. The walls were intact, their cracks and decay mysteriously repaired, and the beacon burned brightly, its warm, steady light sweeping across the dark ocean. But something was different. The air was heavy, as though the light itself carried a weight that pressed against me. My chest ached, and when I looked down, I saw faint, glowing lines tracing their way across my skin, the same looping patterns I'd seen carved into the walls below. I staggered toward the beacon, my hands trembling. The light was mesmerizing, pulsing gently like a living heart. Its warmth washed over me, soothing yet unnervingly alien, as if it were watching me. The whispers returned, soft and mournful. You have restored the balance. The light burns because of you. I turned in a slow circle, searching for the source of the voices. What balance? What is this place? The whispers didn't answer. Instead, they swirled around me, faint and echoing, their words like fragments of a forgotten memory. The dark always seeks to consume. The light holds it back. Why me? I demanded, my voice cracking. Why did this have to be me? The whispers grew quieter, their tone almost sorrowful. You carry the mark. You are the keeper now. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding as the realization sank in. My uncle's letter, the warnings, it wasn't a choice. It never had been. The light began to pulse faster, its beams sweeping more urgently across the ocean. I stepped toward the window, my breath catching as I looked out over the water. The shadows were still there. They writhed and twisted along the cliffs, stretching toward the lighthouse like black lip hair. In the distance, more of them moved across the waves, their forms growing larger, more solid as they drew closer. The whispers surged again. Do not let the light falter. If it goes out, they will come. Panic gripped me as I turned back to the beacon. The steady hum that had filled the room was faltering, its rhythm uneven. The symbols etched into the lantern flickered faintly, their glow dimming. I knew what the light demanded. The cold weight in my chest intensified, the glowing lines on my skin burning faintly as the light drew from me. I dropped to my knees, gasping as I felt my strength slipping away, siphoned into the beacon. This was the price. The light burned because of me, and as long as I stayed here, it would hold the shadows back. But I wouldn't leave. I couldn't. The whispers faded, their voices merging into a single, haunting refrain that echoed through the lantern room. You are the keeper. You are the light. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time felt meaningless within the confines of the lighthouse. The light burned steadily, its sweeping beam casting its protective glow across the cliffs and the endless, restless ocean. But the shadows never stopped moving. They writhed along the horizon, dark and formless, always searching for cracks in the light's reach. I could feel them pressing against the edges of the beacon's power, testing its strength, waiting for a moment of weakness. And they were patient. The glowing lines on my skin had spread, branching like veins across my arms and chest, pulsating faintly in time with the light. Each pulse drained a little more of me, feeding the beacon and keeping the darkness at bay. The whispers were my only companions now. The light must burn. You must endure. Their words were a constant presence, weaving through my thoughts like a hymn. Sometimes they were soothing, other times commanding, but they never left. I had tried to leave once. The staircase leading down from the lantern room was intact, its steps solid beneath my feet. But when I reached the bottom, I found only darkness. The door to the outside world was gone, replaced by an unyielding black void that pulsed with the same malevolence as the shadows outside. The whispers had stopped me before I could step into it. The keeper cannot leave. The light will fail. I climbed back up, defeated, and resumed my place beside the beacon. The lighthouse had become my prison, and I was its prisoner. Sometimes I thought about my uncle. How long had he been here, standing watch over this cursed light? How had he endured the isolation, the endless pull of the beacon draining his strength day after day? Had he known someone else would take his place? The whispers offered no answers, only their relentless refrain. The light must burn. On the rare occasions I slept, the dreams were worse. I saw the shadows overtaking the lighthouse, their snuffing out the beacon as they consumed everything in their path. I saw the ocean rising, its waves black and writhing, swallowing the cliffs and the land beyond. And I saw myself standing in the center of it all, my body twisted and hollow, a shadow of what I once was. I woke each time gasping for air, the whispers soothing me with their familiar mantra. You are the keeper. You are the light. One day, the beacon faltered. The light flickered, its beam dimming for the briefest moment, and the shadows surged. They slammed against the edges of the lighthouse's reach, their jagged forms clawing at the cliffs as the darkness crept closer. I fell to my knees, the glowing lines on my body burning fiercely as the light demanded more of me. I gave in, letting it pull from me freely, and the beacon flared once more, pushing the shadows back into the abyss. The whispers returned, gentle and reassuring. The balance is restored. The light endures. As I knelt there, my strength fading, I realized the truth. The lighthouse wasn't just a barrier. It was a lure, drawing the shadows to its light and holding them there, contained but never destroyed. And I was part of it now. The shadows would never stop coming. The light would never stop burning, and I would never leave.